Peace be to you. Into the problem of evil. Let us begin with the question.
Kia ora, and now my haramai to another episode of Curiously Catholic, the Evangelion podcast. As I'm sure you're more than aware by now, on the 4th of July, we're going to be having Father Andrew Dalton over to talk to us about the Shroud of Turin. So if you haven't already, go on our website, evangelion.co.nz, buy a ticket, buy a whole table of tickets, buy all the tickets, bring as many people as you can, because we're going to be seeing something amazing. We're going to be learning some amazing facts which are helpful for our faith and for all of humanity, I think. And so, without further ado, I'm going to get back straight into the interview with Father Dalton himself. Kia ora, Father, how are you?
Very good, very good. It's here in Rome. It's still morning. I can't believe we're so worlds apart, and our worlds are about to collide. It's going to be so great. My first time in Australia
Yeah.
and
So,
then New Zealand as well.
yeah, so because you're working through Perusia, you're working with Steve and William over there, and they're going to be doing the tour in
Exactly.
Australia.
That's right.
Yeah, I just actually did an interview with Will this morning, and or
Oh, yeah.
William, he prefers to go by, because he's done 3 books on the Shroud, and so
Wow.
I imagine your time over there is going to be quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a roller coaster. I just go where they tell me. I'll be visiting all of like Southeast Asia this summer as well, going to 3 dioceses in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and Hong Kong and Singapore. So thanks be to God, I have good help, and I can just focus on what I do and show up, hopefully, to meet all these wonderful people in these different venues. Some are more academic, some are more spiritual, and some are more in like a setting in a church. So it's quite the mix.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The world at the moment seems really hungry for Christianity, not just Christianity, but like what Catholicism has to offer. Like the Shroud of Turin seems to
Yeah.
come out of nowhere. Some out of nowhere. You did the interview with Matt Fradd. Joe Rogan's been talking about it. It's on the Daily
I
Wire,
know.
and then it's absolutely everywhere. People are talking about the Shroud. People are converting to Catholicism. Big names. What do you think
Yes.
this is all
Yeah.
coming together for some reason, or?
Well, I've been praying about this. This year is a jubilee, and I think we underestimate the power of grace that is dispensed in a jubilee year. But I've noticed it, and it seems disproportionate. It seems extra, and of course, there was in Turin a special effort as well during this jubilee year um, to draw eyes to the shroud and through it to Jesus Christ. And I think you're right. I think that conversion is the miracle more than healings of. I've not heard of that if it's the case with I don't know, cancer patients or people with wounds from fires or something being touched by the shroud. I've not seen that, but I have seen the biggest mountain move, which is the human will, the human soul. And the shroud often occasions that because it puts Jesus and his paschal mystery, his dying and his rising, in the fore. And when you talk about Christ and when you bring the gospel, um, there's the power of heaven behind that. And it's you're right though to say that there's something special about this time. I've been doing this for 15 years probably. It's hard to quantify exactly, but presenting on the shroud through our museum, I have never seen the kind of reaction, the kind of enthusiasm. It seems as this has been brewing. Things have reached a kind of critical mass, and now it's exploding on the internet. And what an opportunity is there! I just hope that we can rise to the occasion and equip more people, especially young people, with the knowledge of our faith. And in that time, we shouldn't miss that opportunity.
Yeah, there was. I agree with the sentiment. It's something that, like, I don't know if anxious is the right word, but like I don't want to miss out, because there was the reports that in the UK and in France, I believe, maybe Paris, there was the biggest number of catechumens this Easter, and they were saying like right after Pope Francis's funeral, there was this massive outpouring of like people actually not just seeking Christianity, not just seeking like a kind of philosophy, but seeking Catholicism, and
Yeah.
which, I mean, it's easy to just put it in Catholicism in the religion box, but it's not just that, is it? There's something about Catholicism that's much bigger than as you would view other religions, and I think because
Yeah.
we have things like the Shroud.
I think that's part of it for sure. But I mean, you're right to say that we sit on a treasure trove that we ourselves have not appreciated nearly enough. Catholicism, I do share your sentiment that using that language almost waters it down because Catholicism is nothing other than the kingdom of Christ on earth as it is in heaven. That's what the Catholic Church, with its beliefs, with its hierarchy, with its teachings, with its sacraments, with its sacramentals, right? All that we have is part of that grand story that God rules the worlds, and he does so as King of David and King of Israel as Son of God. And I think you're right to say that the shroud points to Christ the King, and there's something larger than life. There's something beyond whatever like factoid kind of gets you in the door. And let's face it, with the shroud, there's plenty of minutia that's exciting and compelling and puzzling and intriguing. Whatever gets you in the door, that doesn't exhaust all of its mystique, does it? It's like someone who says, "Ooh, let's look at the immunology studies or the studies of photonegativity, or pick your area of shroud science," and then it's like just keep pulling on that thread, and where does it go?
Mm.
In the retelling of the story of the God Man who took flesh to die a redeeming death and then reign from the cross, rise to glory, the one who's with us in the Eucharist. So all of that is there if you just keep tugging on it. And so the shroud is the shroud is an occasion to share the gospel. That's why the shroud is so powerful.
Yeah, it's. I was just talking about this with William from Oz. It's like he gave us a whole bunch of facts. Like one of the things we were talking about is how the clots remained intact on the shroud, and I was like, that's super
Mhm.
interesting. Especially, I have a medical background. I'm an emergency nurse, and thinking about wound care and stuff. It's interesting, but
Yes.
how do you communicate that to somebody that's just the average Joe? But like you said, there's always something else. Like, I mean, I am also interested in photography, and you got the photo negatives, the whole story about
Right.
the how that came about initially, and I think what's really amazing about it is the Catholic Church is universal, and so is the shroud. There is something
Hmm.
in it for absolutely everyone, and it's all coming down to
That's
this
right.
one point, which is Jesus. And it's such a
Yeah.
great analogy of like just life, that the Catholic
Right.
Church teaches. Like this is the cornerstone, Jesus, and from that everyone can come into it.
That's it. And there's something surprising about that. For me, I remember being in Hong Kong several years ago before COVID, and I was asked to speak at like the 29th floor of some GP Morgan. It had nothing to do with a church. It wasn't, I think I was the only Catholic in the room, but I was invited to share on the shroud. And I was like, okay, not sure how this audience is going to go. And yet, everyone was as interested as if I were in a Catholic church. And it was eye-opening to me to realize that this is look, if I give a homily more than 7 minutes, people start to look at their watches in America, especially, right? But you can't go long enough when it comes to unpacking the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus in light of the shroud. I've
Mm.
just experienced it for years on end in so many cultures and different languages. It's the same. People are thirsty for it. And I think it's because it's a different inroad into that same story. It's kind of like when you're in the Holy Land. For those who've made a pilgrimage, they'll know exactly what I mean. There's something special about being in the place, touching with your hands, seeing with your eyes, walking the same seashore as Jesus in the Sea of Galilee, for example. There's something different now. You've read this story maybe a
Mm.
hundred times since the time you were a child, and yet there's something new. It's like, wow, this isn't fables or fairy tales. This is real, and the implications of that just settle upon you, and it moves you. And so I think it's the same with the shroud. It's all the questions that I get after giving a presentation on the shroud are always so surprising, because sometimes they're more about those implications. People are already putting the pieces together, and now it's like, whoa, if this is real, what's that next step? What's that next question that I have? And you can't expect that. You can't see coming like a question about, oh, and now yeah, what about purgatory again? Or what about intercession of the saints? You're like, how does that connect? And of course, people are just working through in their minds the implications of the truth of Jesus's death and resurrection. It's like Paul said, if Christ isn't risen, my preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. And of course, if it did happen, it's not in vain, and hang on to your hats, right? Because we're going somewhere.
Yeah, and like Flannery O'Connor talking about the Eucharist, if it's just a symbol, to hell with it. We don't want it. Um,
Yeah.
it brings me back to another quote from a Catholic writer, Bishop Barron, in his book
Hmm.
Word on the A Journey to Faith. It's like on the first page. When I open that book, I just like, okay, I'm going to give this a crack. I'm not the best at reading like theology and like or the catechism or anything. That's not really my wheelhouse. But I gave it a crack, and I opened it up, and the first page it says everything. I'm going to misquote it, but the way it sticks in my mind is everything in Catholicism comes down to one thing: the fact that Christ was incarnate, the fact that he once walked amongst us. And like, wait, it's like I just sat with that. I just closed the book and I was like, right, let's think about this. And it's just everything comes back to
Yeah, the central mystery.
yeah, it's just and
Oh,
like
sorry, little lag.
again with the central mystery you were saying.
Yeah, the central mystery insofar as Jesus Christ is the God man, and the incarnation holds together this fact, the wedding of heaven and earth, time and eternity, divinity and humanity. In his person, in his person, he's one God, but one divine person, but in a human nature, he is now made manifest himself so that we can be saved, so that we can see an example of life, so that we can know how much he loved us, and so that he can divinize us, so he can bring us to where he is. God became man so that we might become God. It says in the Catechism, like what he is by nature, we come by grace. That's the whole story in a nutshell. You can get at it from so many different angles, and we do. Look, every time we pick up the rosary, we're looking at this God man from a different angle, in a different instance, where a different insight into the implications of that incarnation are. The fact that he who lives enthroned in glory should come all the way down and even take up a cross and die on it, like that shows the mortal nature that he assumed he didn't have from all eternity, but he took it on himself out of love for us, for our sake, for our salvation. We repeat these expressions in the creed every Sunday. We yawn at them now; they've become so commonplace. We forget how people, martyrs, spilled their blood to defend these truths, and sometimes we need to be reawakened to just the appeal and the amazement of these articles of faith by something as simple as an artifact. Oh my gosh, he did die? Wow, this God man shed his blood. He was scourged and crowned and pierced in the side. Like all of a sudden, my eyes are open, like the scales fall, and I can contemplate in a fresh way, in a way that changes me. We need
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, I feel like I could go down. I could feel like I could talk to you forever about everything, but we want to keep it onto the shroud. Like we are talking
Okay,
about the
yeah.
shroud, but let's because I'm torn between just carrying this conversation on with you and actually having something that the audience might want to listen to as well. So historically, practically, on the human level, what is the shroud? Because it's not a Christian thing. It's not a Catholic thing. It's just a thing. And what is a shroud? Because I mean, my only understanding
Yeah.
of shroud up until this was like something you hide behind. Like you're shrouded in mystery or
Oh,
something.
right, right. Well, okay, so there's so many inroads into this question, but I mean, part of it is sources, right? So you're right to say that if you just show up in front of a linen, it's just a linen like so many others, right? It's made from flax. It has characteristics of, you can see the kind of weave that it has, but you're right, it's just there. What do you make of it? Now you get into interpretations, and guess what? The shroud doesn't come with this with instruction package. It doesn't say, "Here, let me explain to you what I am." What do? You show up and you observe the details like a detective. You gather in the clues and then you try to make sense of it. What we're trying to do is basically infer the best explanation for what's there. But what's there? Well, what's there is this 14-foot cloth. It's about 3'7", and it contains the image of a body. The image is what makes it an absolute unicum. It's one of a kind because it has a frontal image, a man's body, which is crucified, scourged, crowned with thorns, pierced in the side. And this is something, at any one of those details, we can drill further down to say, wait a minute. Well, what do you mean he's crowned? Like, what do you actually see? Well, look, there's 50 flows of blood here at the area of the head, in the front and the back. We have, blood that's from an artery, blood that's from a vein. You can keep drilling down all the way in any one of these details. What I try to do in a short presentation, and I think this is, it shows two approaches that are kind of different. Um, a very typical approach would be to say, look, Jesus, as we know him from the historical sources, this is what he suffered. He was scourged. He was beaten. He was crowned with thorns. He was pierced aside. He had nails at his hands and feet. Lo and behold, on the shroud, we find the same series of springs. And from there, people try to argue that, look, this is testimony to his passion, death, potentially his resurrection too. Um, that is valid. But people from there, what's an option for your interlocutor, for your intellectual adversary to say, oh, well, of course he has those characteristics, because that's exactly what an artist would want to depict, given the biblical record, right? And so, while that's true, we have to go a step further, which is, and this is why I would make a different case. I would start as a detective just gathering up all the unique qualities about this shroud image that demand an explanation, and yet none has been found yet. For example, let me just rattle off a few in short succession. We can always drill down deeper. But for example, the shroud shows an anatomically perfect human body. That is, with regard to its sufferings, with regards to its physical shape, it contains. Hey, we're back. Okay. Yeah,
So you were just rattling off a few things, and you.
yeah. Did you hear anatomical perfection and the fact that the photo negative?
So just
Yeah,
for
and I
everyone
said
listening.
also it contains 3D information
Okay.
encoded in the cloth. Yeah, the internet is so bad. Oh, goodness. But the important thing to say here is that though the shroud is the most studied archaeological object in the history of the world, and even though we've proposed all kinds of naturalistic theories by which this image might be made, we can actually disprove all that have been proposed. We know it's not a scorch. It's not created by heat. The fluorescence proves as much. We know it's not a painting. There's no pigment, organic or inorganic. There's no varnish. There's no dye. There's no ink. There's no brush strokes with which color is applied to a cloth. And so it's not a rubbing. It's not a photograph. There are no highlights. There are no shadows. So whatever it is, it's not something that we can reproduce in a laboratory, or at least No one has yet, even though you can win, by the way, $1 million in America. In the UK, there's a similar prize, who might reproduce by artificial means a same characteristics. And so, what do we infer about that? Well, that it's not the natural effect of a natural that it's the natural effect of a super. And if that's the case, well, then it's clear why Christians are interested in this cloth, right? It's one more witness, not just of his death, also a testimony to the resurrection. That is where I get interested in the shroud. And I see it as a means of evangelization, even insofar as it just presents a puzzle, right? That you and I have to answer as best we see fit. But the data isn't going away. Like it's observable. The things that I rattled off, they're not contentious, they're not debated, they're not controversial. They're observable. Anyone can see that the image is there and that it has these qualities. Our job as detectives is to say, okay, what sense do we make of it? How did it get there? And it seems to me, if you don't believe in the resurrection in the first century, gosh, it's almost as if you need a resurrection in some other century in order to get these qualities. I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but I'm trying to press a point here: is that the shroud is extraordinary in its effects, and it demands a cause of some kind. And it's not enough to say, well, can't describe it yet, can't explain it to date. Tomorrow, I'm sure we will, by merely naturalistic means. I mean, you can believe that if you want, but we don't have reasons to believe that. And so the great irony is, it turns out that the Christian who believes in the resurrection has reasons to believe. The fideist who clings to the conviction that the shroud is merely the cause of some the effect of some naturalistic cause, he does so fideistically, without reasons. It's like, okay, you can't. I just don't have that much faith, um, and so I much prefer to look to the historical record and see that even from the beginning, people believe that this Jesus who died and was buried rose from the dead. That is perfectly compatible with everything we know about the shroud. And so, what I just want to do is tell that story, present the evidence, as if you're in the courtroom saying, hey, look, jury members, look, all you who are watching, um, here's the evidence. Make sense of it as you will, but here it is.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when like the scientism of the age that we're in starts saying, "Oh, well, we can reproduce that," and it's like, well, congratulations. However, could you reproduce it in the first century in a cave with no electricity? There's that
Oh, right.
story of like sciences worked out how to create the earth, and they turn to God and say, "Look, we can create the earth. Okay, sh- go and show me." Then it's like, okay, well, we need this dust, and it's like, oh no, I didn't have that.
Go get your own dust.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The problem of creation ex nihilo. That you're right. That's a category difference. And so yeah, I think there's something different here. Like the shroud is the most studied archaeological object in the history of the world. Usually, the more you study a thing, the more you understand it. In this case, the more we study it, the more mysteries we unveil, the more enigmatic qualities of the cloth are seen, but not yet understood. At least one thing is to describe it and to read. Like for example, I could zoom in on the linen and I could tell you about the 3-to-1 herringbone weave. I could tell you how like okay, the cellulose that composes the flax linen is deoxidized or dehydrated in such a way that it has this monochromatic sepia tone. Okay, that's just descriptive, right? But the question is, how did it get there?
Yeah.
Why is it this way? And this is what we've been on so far. You can describe it, but the more information and minutia we about what's there, the more necessary it seems that I need to appeal to someone beyond the merely naturalistic. This is, I wonder if I could point out scriptures a little bit, because this is something that I think especially a Christian audience will be interested in. Like when the resurrection is Gospel of John, it's very surprising the way he gets into this story. Do you remember Easter Sunday? Mary gets up very early while it's still dark, and it goes to the tomb only to find that the stone is rolled away, the body isn't there. She races to tell the beloved disciple and Peter. They race to the tomb, and John gets there first. He stoops, he looks in, he sees the burial cloths, and he waits for Peter. Peter goes down those steps past the stone that's been rolled away inside the tomb. He sees the Othonia, the burial cloths, the linen cloths. John then goes in after. He sees and believes. This is the most remarkable thing you could say. I mean, of all the ways you might think to tell the story, I think you could ask 100 Christians to invent a resurrection story. Nobody would invent a story in this way. They're fixating on the linen cloths. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. It's the burial cloths that are mentioned. It's a seeing that he believes. I always want to shake the gospel writer by the lapels and be like, what did you see so that you believed? What is these linen cloths that require what? Faith in the resurrection? Like, I can think of other reasons. There could be, dirty laundry on the ground, if that's what he's seeing. But what I think we've paid not enough attention to is, even though the details are few, they're essential. Everything about this story is suggest that we have reasons to believe. In other words, he doesn't say, despite what he saw, he believed anyway. No, it's in light of what he saw. When he saw it, the way that he saw it, that upon seeing it that way, he saw and believed. And that's connected to not the living Jesus, not yet, that'll come next. But in the first moment, it's a witness. It's an eyewitness, you could say. Okay, the shroud isn't a human person. It doesn't have human eyeballs. It doesn't have a human mouth. And yet it tells a story. It bears witness. It gives a testimony. And that testimony is essential for understanding what happened next. I could unpack this at some length, but I just want to point out now that our faith is testimony. First and foremost, we have the testimony, and everybody's familiar with Matthew and John, if you're more in Cephas, right? But do we think about the monuments and the documents? In addition to the documents I just mentioned, we have the sudarium and the shroud, both of which witnessed the moment the cadaver became a glorified body. And so the shroud isn't just some, I don't know, just one more testimony. It's the first. It's the first witness, even before Mary Magdalene, even before Peter and the disciples on the road to Emmaus, or Thomas a week later. The first to see the moment he converted from death into new life. That's what the shroud witnessed, and it bears testimony. And so we have a privilege if now, with the help of modern instrumentation and science, we can unpack its testimony even further. But even on Easter Sunday, it was bearing witness. Before it was scrutinized in any scientific way, it was already queuing up, hey, Jesus is back and he's risen.
Yeah, we have information now that they didn't have, but they didn't need to come to the same conclusions that we can now tell people. It's crazy how the world's changed. So, like the cloths that we found, 14 feet, because that's back and front, isn't it? So it's doubled over. These cloths are like traditional Jewish burial cloths. Is that right?
Traditional, I would be careful with that word, yes and no. if you remember, who is it that is taking care of Jesus's burial? Who is it that provides his own rock-hewn tomb? Joseph of Arimathea. He's a wealthy man. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. He buys the cloth, and you would need to be someone of elite status, something of this. He's buried as a king. This too is something of a conundrum, and the one who's crowned with thorns, the one who's beat to a pulp, scourged front and back. If he's a common criminal, if he's the worst of the worst, worthy of crucifixion, wait a minute, why is he being buried in a royal way? And it's not obvious that that should be customary. It wasn't. Like, in fact, we don't know of anyone else who was crowned and crucified. Just to put two things together, that should kind of hint at this royal claims. Oh, you're a king? Kings need a crown, right? They put a crown of thorns on it. But they also buried him in a very unique way. And if you remember, it's not just Joseph of Arimathea, but there's another member of the Sanhedrin who's also a secret follower of Jesus, and that's Nicodemus. Nicodemus buys 100 Roman pounds of aloe and myrrh. What does that cost? Well, a small fortune, right? So Jesus's burial is absolutely unique. We shouldn't expect something every day or something. And so I just put that little caveat on tradition. I think, yes, even we today have the notion that if you got in a car accident, or God forbid there should be a dead body on the side of the road, I think one of the first intuitions would be to cover the face. Okay, so the shroud, the sudarium is likely that, right? Something that in a very they would use to cover. Also, there was 17 verse 11, if I'm not mistaken, says exactly that, right? And so there would be a sensitivity to cover that body and mop up or absorb that blood and bury this cloth with his body. So it's not as if we have 100 other tombs that have linen cloths that are of this nature. Certainly none bear the image of a body. In that sense, the shroud is absolutely unique. But the idea that linen cloths existed, I went to Turin recently. You could just go down the street from the cathedral and visit the Egyptian Museum. You can find linen cloths that are literally thousands of years older than the shroud. So on that sense, there's no, miracle, just that a linen cloth should be in existence from the time period of Jesus. And that dead body, along with it, the organic material composed the linen. Of course, in Jesus's case, we have an exception because he didn't remain in death. He didn't decompose in contact for a very long time anyway with his dead body. And so in that case, it's quite unique too.
Yeah, so it is something that had been used for centuries. Because the thing that comes to mind is the tilma with Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's an image that is imprinted on there. Obviously, this is more like an icon style, and it was more like an image, but like it's on a rudimentary kind of piece of garment that doesn't really last that long, and it has lasted longer. So, that's not the miracle that we're looking at. The miracle we're looking at is you just absolutely everything else. The fact that we now historians all believe there's no historian that doesn't think Jesus existed, and we see all these images of people trying to depict what Christ may or may not have looked at based off historical data and da da da. But we know, we have an image of Jesus's face, and that's just it. I mean, I can't quite articulate how amazing that is, and we can go into detail, and I'm sure you will when you come over here on there's the fact about the 0.2 microns above the. I don't even know what that means. It's like the fact that it's not even on the material. What is that? I mean, I'm going to be talking to someone tomorrow morning about quantum physics, so hopefully they'll help me come to understand it a bit more deeply. But I suppose, because I'm talking to you and you're a priest and expert, and it's I guess what does this mean? Not just for us Catholics and Christians, but what does this mean for the world? The fact that we have such a undeniable artifact that is also it's not like it's not just one thing. It's not like the blood of Christ in Corpus Christi. It's like, okay, that's the blood in Christ, we can maybe, but this hits on so many different levels. What does it mean for the secular world as well as the faithful?
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of brings us back to Jesus' own question, which is, who do you say that I am? That's an open question. That's something each of us has to answer. And I think the shroud presents the person of Christ and what he did, especially in his dying and rising, that causes us to respond in freedom according to our wits, right? Like, you have to make the best sense of it. And I think there isn't one response. Like, I think some responses are better than others, more adequate, more appropriate, more fitting. And yet, what I think is the value in the shroud is that it presents the question that Jesus presented. It occasions a personal response. But I think you're right to say that it's at least bearing witness to the existence of this man. Look, even people like Yves Delage, who is agnostic, or Barry Schwartz, who was Jewish till his dying day, had no problem saying that the man of the shroud is Jesus of Nazareth, merely on empirical grounds, on historical grounds, on scientific grounds. And so I think they're right to make this kind of case from the preponderance of evidence, right? Isn't that how we speak in the courtroom? Okay, judge, I can't give you an absolute proof in a kind of philosophical or mathematical sense, but who can in any historical event, right? And so what I'm going to strive for is something different. I'm going to give a preponderance of evidence, legal proof, not philosophical proof. And I think that that kind of argument can be made. But that only gets you so far, right? That gets you that Jesus existed, that Jesus died, that he was buried. Okay, well, what about the proposition that Jesus rose from the dead, or that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God, a divine person in the flesh who now lives forever seated at the right hand of the Father? Whoa, these are grand claims that go beyond the mere existence of the Jesus of Nazareth, right? And so I think we need to gather up all the evidence wherever it lies. And the shroud presents a huge amount, but it stops short of, let's say, proof of the miraculous. In fact, I know you used this term just a moment ago, and I'm going to add a little nuance from my perspective. I try to be careful about, some people say that the shroud is a miracle. And it's kind of this ambiguous expression that I want to press into. Like, well, what exactly do you mean by that? I tend to think, and feel free to disagree with me, but that the shroud isn't a miracle, that the image on the shroud isn't a miracle. I think it's the natural effect of a miracle. That is to say, I think the resurrection event is the miracle, properly speaking. And people could say you're splitting hairs, and I would tend to agree with them. I know how people speak. I know what they mean when they that yes, the resurrection is a miracle, and this is an effect that is immediately downstream or derived from that event. And yet, it's precisely because it's a natural effect of a supernatural event that it's of interest to us. Like, I can press into on the shroud, 0.2 microns, ultraviolet excimer lasers, and what kind of tone, and with 40 billionths of a second, with 34,000 billion joules per second, like, what kind of effect does that render? This is exactly the kind of thing scientists do. And so there's a portion of this that is within the purview of the sciences. Like, it's within the scope of what physicists and chemists and biologists and immunologists do. That's great. That makes it worthy of study, capable of study. We're saying this is it's not just some, I don't know. Imagine you were a Christian who thought the resurrection is a symbolic or spiritual event. It didn't take place in the in history. Like, that would be incompatible with Christian orthodoxy. But there's plenty of Christians who accept a resurrection of that kind, some sort of spiritual or symbolic resurrection, not something so tangible and literal as a bodily resurrection. Well, okay, make sense of the shroud. Make sense of the shroud from on that theory. It's not gonna it's not gonna be an easy road. Okay, so I think that I agree with Pope St. John Paul II. The shroud is a provocation of our intelligence. That's its first role, to provoke scrutiny, and it demands an explanation. Again, it's observable, it's there. It's not controversial whether or not it's there, or if it's there in the way that it is. All can observe the way in which it's there. The question is, what sense do you make of it? What's the genesis? What's the way in which it came into being? If we can't explain that naturalistically, I like the way Sherlock put it to his sidekick, Watson, right? Doesn't he say, once you've eliminated all that's impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, is most certainly true. And so it just happens to be the case that every theory that's merely naturalistic, whether it's a painting, a scorch, a camera, or a rubbing, it fails. It fails on naturalistic terms. It's disproved. Okay, well, what else is on the table? Like, really, what other proposal is there? And it seems to me the one that has been most popular for the most amount of time since Jesus' resurrection until our own day is that he miraculously rose unto glory, and that is the reason we have venerated this cloth and adored this person, because he didn't remain in death, but he showed his divinity rising from the dead. And so that's what I think the shroud is provoking us to wrap our minds around, or at least give assent to, or not, right? This is my claim. Remember Caiaphas? Are you the Christ and the Son of God? And Jesus says, ego eimi, right? I am. And you'll see the Son of Man from now on, by the way, seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Okay, what do we make of that claim? We know what Caiaphas made of it. He said, blasphemy, right? Like, that I cannot abide to that claim. And yet Jesus justified it. He vindicates his claim by calling his shot. 3 times he said, I'll die and rise. Here he is moments before his death because of this claim, right? What put Jesus to the cross? It wasn't because he didn't pay a temple tax, or because he was going to raise up some insurrection against the Roman armies, or because he was going to build some architectural building at the top of the Temple Mount. No, it was because he claimed to be the Son of David and the Son of God, the Messiah, and one with the Father. That is the momentous claim. That what gets Jesus buried. And this is the claim we have to deal with, historically speaking. Like, it's a historical conundrum. How did you get from the Gospels as written, and now the shroud as it bears testimony, to the fact that the earliest Christologies of Jesus were high? Like, historians agree about this, that the early church, from the first moment, thought very highly of Jesus. Maybe that's because Jesus made the divine claims. This this is a question for historians to take up, and historians have. I'm thinking of a recent publication by Jesus and Divine Christology, and he claimed uh, in thoroughly Jewish ways this is what got him buried in the first place. It wasn't for anything else. It wasn't because he had some gentle message about forgiveness that he was crucified. He was crucified, and it says on his titulus, right, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. And they don't put that, say that he said that. Pontius Pilate says, quote, scripsi, what I have written, I have written. That got Jesus put to the cross. He claimed to be a divine Messiah, and that was held as blasphemous by some, true by others. We have to chime in with our own voice on that particular question.
Yeah, I always think, especially with we're looking at this scientifically, and science is based on empirical observation, repeatable studies, and strict rules around data collection and such like. But imagine you had one event that only ever happened once, and you observed that happening. I always think this when I listen to the scriptures of the upper room, the descent of the Holy Spirit. It describes sound like a rushing wind, and everybody could hear it. And I say to myself, that's what the sound happens when time and space is ruptured. When God comes down to earth, that's what it sounds like, and we know that because it mentions that. And so you want to know what the residuals of a resurrected man is. So, well, the Shroud of Turin is what happens when a person resurrects. Just as when you boil water, steam rises, we can repeat that. We can't repeat a resurrection, but we can tell you that every time, if you boiled water once only, that would happen. If when Jesus resurrected, this happened, and this is the proof. And I think, because as we said, the preponderance of evidence, it's like I think it all comes down to, what do you want? What world do you want to live in? Because even even the people at the time, it's like you either think he was real or you don't, but that's on you, because everything else is pointing towards he was real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're pointing to the limits of science, as science is good, but it can't do what is beyond its nature, right? So as you said, it by definition, the empirical sciences look to what's measurable, what's sensible, what's in the world of bodies and material objects. When you're talking about a resurrection, we're not talking about something that is reducible to the empirical. I don't know where that comes in the resurrection. So even if you are, let's say, open to the idea that great light effects accompanied the moment of the resurrection, and I'm inclined to think in those terms, but I can't reduce the resurrection to the light effects that accompanied it. That's not the resurrection. What is the essential of the resurrection? That a corpse, a body in the state of death, moved not just into a state of life like you and I share right now, because we're going to die. We're in a mortal state right now. That is not the state that we ascribe to Jesus in his resurrection. He rises unto glory, to an immortal state. It's not a reanimation like Lazarus. Like Lazarus was called out of the tomb, sure, but he'd have to go back to it eventually, right? And so that's just a resuscitation. And that was a miracle for sure. Reanimating a corpse, resuscitating, bringing back unto a mortal state. But this is not what we understand Jesus to have undergone. Okay, well, with what organ, with what microscope, with what lens, with what instrument are you going to tell me that a cadaver is now in a state of glory, of divinization. There is no lens, there is no microscope, there is no instrument whatsoever. And so this is where we have to remember what Jesus had to say about faith and reason, right? I'm thinking of Thomas in particular, the one who said, I will not believe unless I scrutinize, unless I probe, unless I stick my finger in the wounds that I saw, he had on Friday. I want to see the nail wounds in his hands, in his feet, in his side. And Jesus shows up on the eighth day, right? Now, a week after the original resurrection, and says, come, Thomas, come, you skeptic, you. Press if you must. But don't be unbelieving. I love that he doesn't rebuke Thomas or simply point fingers at him. He says, by all means, scrutinize. Use your empirical sciences, your senses, measure if you must. But for that reason, should you be unbelieving? Jesus is already pointing to the fact that faith transcends reason. It goes beyond it. It's not anti-rational, but it is trans-rational. It goes beyond reason. If it does, it never goes against reason. And so Thomas is the one who says, after seeing the evidence, mind you, it's not that he says, oh, I won't look, but I'll just believe. It's not fideistic. It's upon seeing the risen Jesus that he who had no predisposition to believe, with the evidence, saw, and seeing what he saw because he saw it that way, saw and believed, my Lord and my God. That's the most direct confession in Jesus' divinity that we have anywhere in the Gospels. And it's on the lips of the skeptic, which is reminds us that we can do all the science we want, but hopefully we won't. Science invites us to do, which is to natural light of reason can attain, but it's not less what supernatural faith can attain. We have that capacity because we're not merely material beings. We're also, souls that are capable of, intellect, intelligible, and this shroud is intelligible. The body of Jesus was intelligible, but it was open to faith. And that is where there's a secret area of the soul that says, I give assent. It's not against my reason, but it is beyond the natural light that reason alone knows.
There's a lot more that I want to dive into, but I realize that time's getting on. But we have good news in that you are coming here. And whilst you're here, I'll do another episode with you, and there'll be less internet lag because you'll be right in front of me, and we can go deeper and have a great conversation. Because there's this whole thing I listened to the other day on the intellect, and we're getting to that area now. I'm like, oh, I'd love to dive into that, but I also want to make sure I hear everything you say on that because
gotcha.
It's a bit outside of my kind of like understanding. I need a bit more prompting and good ears for it.
Well, listen, stay curious. That's how you stay learning. So,
well, the podcast is called Curiously Catholic, so we got to stay curious. We got to stay Catholic. But so you're coming out 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. You'll be in New Zealand, and 3 days before that, you'll be in Australia. I have to say I'm very excited about this. I think it's going to be great stuff, and if it's not a big impact now, it's definitely going to be the beginning of something fantastic. So, in the meantime, if anyone wants to find out a bit more about you, where can they go?
Well, first of all, just thanks for spreading the word. I would send people to Othonia.org. That's Othonia. Othonia, the biblical word for the burial cloths. It's a brand new website that's just opened, and you can do a deep dive into a study of the shroud and even learn more about things like a postgraduate certificate in shroud studies, see all kinds of videos. You can interrogate the chat, the artificial intelligence, even in Russian and in Chinese. So it's getting better and better with every passing day. And come check us out at Othonia.
Well, brilliant. Thank you much, Father, for your time. And thank you guys for listening as well as you could. please do get involved, do buy tickets, evangelion.co.nz, like, share and subscribe on all that we do so that we can spread things like this across New Zealand, because there's people that are waiting to hear it. There's people that are waiting for a preponderance of evidence to bring us back to the person that is Jesus Christ. So, stay curious, stay Catholic, and God bless.